Hello and welcome to this series of small pieces of content to let you know more about the Graviton processors. I'm Arthur Petitpierre, a principal essay looking after our Graviton-based instances and helping customers to adopt them. Today, I'm going to talk about package management with Graviton-based instances. The reason I'm talking about that is when adopting those Graviton-based instances, our customers sometimes struggle to find the right versions of the packages that they should use, or they're wondering about how can they find those versions. So just before we get started, let's do a quick reminder on what the Graviton processor are. So we are now at the first generation of AWS Graviton processors, and those processors are custom silicon designed by AWS following the ARM64 architecture. They're targetedly optimized for cloud-native workloads, which means that we have designed them with the right balance of performance and power consumption to target the kind of scale-out workloads that you run in the cloud at the right price and at the right performance. Building our own processors allows us to rapidly innovate, taking the feedback from our customers to build new processors that are more suited to their application. I mentioned we are at the third generation of Graviton processors. So the first one was powering our A1 instances. You've probably never heard about that. It was mainly a vehicle to get applications ported to AWS. Graviton processors, things like operating systems or open source application, and some of our software vendor partners. The second generation of Graviton processors, the Graviton 2, is probably the first one that you've been willing to use in production. It's available now in almost every possible AWS region. And those instances are called, for example, C6G, M6G, and R6G. Graviton 3 is the latest generation of the Graviton processors that we have announced in 2021. It's now available in a couple of form factors like C7G, M7G, and R7G. And we are releasing them in more and more regions. They're available in 5 regions right now. When you're starting to use Graviton, one of the questions you might have is, or my favorite software available on top of Graviton? One place where it took a little bit of time before all the components were available was for all the software that are sold or released by software vendors. And here, there's now a pretty awesome momentum as far as ISVs are concerned with the adoption of Graviton processors. In the configuration and monitoring realm, for example, we have support from Chef, from Datadog, from Dynatrace, from Honeycomb. Honeycomb was actually one of our really, really early adopters. New Relic, I've been involved with those guys. They've been really, really quick and successful to adopt Graviton-based instances. You can use Splunk, that is fully supported now on Graviton-based instances, and you can use Terraform. In the security realm, CrowdStrike was the first security vendor to adopt Graviton-based instances. We have Qualys support, Rapid7, and more than I can list on that slide. In the CI/CD space, there's also support from a lot of vendors like Circle CI, GitHub Actions, GitLab, Jenkins, or Travis CI. If you want to get a more comprehensive list of the software vendors that do have support for Graviton-based instances and get shortcuts to where you can download those versions or what are the exact versions supported, in our Graviton technical guide, the URL is at the bottom of this page. There's a long but not exhaustive list of software vendors who do support our Graviton-based instances, along with which software they do support, and usually a URL to their documentation, listing the version that is supported, and the announcement of the support. That list is by no means exhaustive. There are hundreds of thousands of software vendors, and we definitely can't list all of them. If you're a software vendor and you want to be on that list, don't hesitate to either send me an email or open an issue on the repository. We would happily add you to the list. In terms of looking for software that would support the Graviton-based instances, there's a pretty important thing to know about, which is which architecture you should be targeting. And when it comes to architecture, you will see lots of different names. For example, ARMv8 or x64, x86 64, AMD 64, Intel 64, ARM 64, ARch 64. That's a little bit of a mess, and sometimes it's hard to understand what's behind, what means what. So with regards to the Graviton processors, you will see three main things. One thing is ARMv8. That's the hardware specification, the specification of the design of the cores. Actually, it's ARM v8-A, since that's the architecture for not for the low power, but the high performance types of cores. And you might see ARM v8.6-A, which is one of the latest revisions of that architecture. But ARM v8, that's the hardware specification. When you see ARch 64, that's the 64-bit architecture of the ARMv8 hardware specification. GCC, for example, use ARch 64. When you see ARM64, that's the name that Apple used when implementing a backend for the LLVM compiler. And that name has also been picked up by the Linux kernel. So for all practical purposes, you can consider ARch64 and ARM64 as the same thing when you're looking for software. If you find a package that is targeting ARch64, that's probably what you're looking for. If you find one that is targeting ARM64, that's probably also what you're looking for. How does it work for your favorite Linux distribution? Actually, pretty much the same. So if you go to the AWS console, you will have two options. One is an x86 64 AMI, and one is an ARM64 version of the AMI. For Graviton processors, take the ARM64 version. That's the one you need. Once you have started your Linux distribution and you want to install packages, well, here there's absolutely no difference. If you're on a Debian-based distribution, you can use apt as you were using it on x86. The behavior is going to be exactly the same. Behind the scene, the package manager will pick up the right repository targeting the specific architecture for Graviton, so ARM64, instead of the x86 64 repositories that it would be using on x86 versions of the distribution. If you're using an RPM-based distribution, such as Red Hat, you can use Yum just the exact same way, again, as you would be using it on an x86 64 distribution, or if that's a Fedora-based distribution, you can use DNF the exact same way. So here, nothing has changed. You won't be lost. That's the exact same tools you've always used. Now, what about container images? So as much as high-level languages, software that are written in high-level languages can be run without modification, when using containers, the container images, they are actually architecture specific. So yes, they're pretty portable, but still, the container image itself needs to target the specific underlying architecture. So when choosing a container to run on Graviton, or when trying to understand whether a specific container does support the Graviton-based instances, you will have to look for the right architecture. The good news is the usual repositories for images like Docker Hub, they do give you the ability to search for a specific architecture. So when using the URL that's at the top, which is actually what's generated when you click the ARM64 architecture on the search engine, it will bring you back instances that are targeting that exact version. And if we have a look at one of those images, you can see that, for example, here, the Alpine version is showing ARM64 among the supported architectures. You will be able to do exactly the same with some other container repositories. And what about your favorite project on GitHub? I'm pretty sure there are some packages that you get directly from various open source projects on GitHub. How do you do that for those? Well, let's take an example. Here, Corretto 17. So if you look at the Corretto 17 page, so Corretto is the Amazon supported version of OpenJDK that we distribute at no cost and that we support on AWS and on your on-prem installations. So for Corretto, if I look at the bottom right of the page, there's a link to Corretto releases. And if we zoom on the Corretto release page, we can see a list of various packages. That page is actually interesting because on that page, you can see all the acronyms that I've listed previously, like AMD64, x86-64, even x64, and of course, the different acronyms for the ARM architecture. So on that page, the ones you would be interested in would be the Linux AArch64 versions. And you can see here that there's a version for the Debian-based distributions, such as Debian or Ubuntu. You can see that it's targeting them because it's listed as arm64.deb. And Debian and Ubuntu have chosen ARM64 as the name for the architecture targeting the 64-bit version of ARM processors. And the .deb is the Debian package system. The next one you can see is an RPM package. Here, Red Hat distributions have chosen AArch64 as the name of the ARM architecture. And that one would be the right one to install on either RHEL or Fedora. And finally, the Corretto project is distributing a distribution independent package, packaged as a tarball, and that one is also using AArch64 in its naming. If you were trying to do the same with another open source software, use the exact same methodology. Try to find the versions with either AArch64 or ARM64. That's the way to go. If you need more information about the Graviton-based instances during your adoption, we have a Graviton technical guide that is hosted on GitHub. The URL for that is at the top of this page. It covers a lot of things, including language runtimes, libraries, lists of ISVs that are supported on Graviton. And if there's anything missing, or if you have more questions, you can either open an issue on that repository that we will try to solve as fast as possible, or you can send us an email on ec2-arm-dev-feedback@amazon.com. There's a team of engineers and solutions architects that are listening to that address, and we will do our best to answer all your questions. Thank you for listening, and good luck with your Graviton adoption. I hope you will enjoy those processors. Thank you.